It's my dad, Bill Stuart, otherwise known as the Billdozer. Our retro sports expert is coming in to talk some Luis Tiant. Dad, before I get there, I have to ask you this. Is the word inimitable? INIMITABLE?
Inimitable. Yep.
Should that word be in a headline?
No reason why not.
Well, I mean, I'm not. I know I'm not the brightest knife in the chandelier, but I do have a college degree. I don't know what that word is.
Well, the idea is that now you're supposed to look it up.
I mean, John Powers should be retired. He shouldn't be having me look stuff up in a dictionary. The inimitable ace of the 75 AL champion Red Sox. Would you agree with that for Luis Tiant?
Absolutely. But, before we get to
what does the word mean? What does the word mean?
Inimitable means that nobody can imitate him. There's
Okay,
no one else like him.
I thought that. Then that makes sense. It like unimitatable is how I would have said it at Rockland High anyway.
Hey, before we get to Louis,
one
comment on your last segment there. We're talking about Drake May and what the plan was. Who the hell knows what the plan was? But as you were talking about it, I kept thinking about Mike Tyson's classic line. Everybody's got a plan until they're punched in the face. Yep. And when you're 1-4 and you see the ceiling of an Alex Van Pelt offense with Jacoby Brissett is 13 points, you've been punched in the face again and again, and you got to do something. Whether your plan was game 10 or game 15 or game 6, it doesn't matter. What you got's not working. You're losing the fans. It's a lot easier fix than Baylor's fix. Baylor, I don't know what the heck you're going to do to make that better, but at least you've got somebody in the closet with the Patriots that can come in and people are going to be watching again because they want to see what this kid can do.
Speaking of in the closet with the Patriots, have you seen any of this Hernandez thing? This Hernandez show?
No.
I didn't ask you about it. It's interesting. Oh, it's interesting. There is a clip. I should have sent you that. I should have had this clip for the show, Zach. I sent it to Zach this morning. It's the guy playing Belichick is just like blaring Bon Jovi in his office. And they cut to like the secretary outside. She kind of shakes her head. And I had this idea of like, I love that in being Bill Belichick's secretary, the worst problem you have is that he plays Bon Jovi a little bit too loud. It is, it's not good. It's not a good show. Not a good show at all. But let's talk Luis Tiant.
Yeah,
I opened with it yesterday, Dad. I didn't want to sound like a broken record, but a hero of the 1975 World Series has died at age 83 and unfortunately will not be able to see himself go into the Hall of Fame, although he deserves to be. And I'm not sounding like a broken record. This time it's for a much more sympathetic character in Luis Tiant. And this is something that many, but you and I have talked about for years, that Luis should be in the Hall of Fame. His career gets overlooked, and a lot of it comes down to counting stats. So Pete asked me this question yesterday after I went on a whole rant on why Luis Tiant should be in the Hall of Fame. And he said, so why isn't Luis Tiant in the Hall of Fame? You lived through it. Why is Luis Tiant not in the Hall of Fame already?
Luis Tiant's not in the Hall of Fame because he just didn't do it long enough.
19 years.
Yeah, but he had injuries in there. He had a great middle of his career. He had a great beginning. I mean, 1968, he took advantage of the lowered mound and he led the league in ERA.
Mm-hmm. Bad teams
there in Cleveland. Then he got traded. Then he hurt his arm. Then he made the comeback. I mean, with the Red Sox from 72 to 76, 77, he pitched some of the best baseball that we'd seen in Boston. And then after that, it was a pretty middling career. So, the injuries, changing his style. And you look at his win totals, and outside of 3 or 4 years in Boston, he was a 12 or 13 game winner. And I always say, and you know this, my bias is always, I'm going to Baseball Reference and looking at the comparables. And hey, he starts out really well. Comparables, Catfish Hunter.
Yep.
Great. Hall of Famer.
We went through this yesterday, actually. I'm trying to pull it up now.
Yeah, then after that, you get Jim Bunning, Billy Pierce,
Lolich Drysdale.
Perry. So, yeah, I mean, some guys who, at number 10, Oral Hershiser.
Yeah, but Kevin Brown in there, too.
Guys who were, some of them were in the Hall of Fame, but with the exception of Catfish, borderline Hall of Famers at best. Mm-hmm. So, he falls into that. And you and I have had this discussion for 15 years back and forth of the Hall of Fame versus the Hall of Very Good. And which
Mm-hmm.
side does Dwight Evans fall into? And which side does Jim Rice fall into? And Louis is just one of those guys, Kurt Schilling. Another one. I think Schilling's probably more deserving because of his great postseason record. But Louis not going to get there. He's not going to get there because it just he's on the wrong side, I think, of that dividing line. Although, in fairness to him, as always, there are less accomplished guys who are in the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
Mean that he should be in there, means they should be removed, but there's no process for impeaching and convicting a Hall of Fame member.
I want to put this head to head to you between Tiant and Catfish Hunter, because Catfish is known as, one of the dominant starters of the 70s. But when you look at the numbers, all right, Luis Tiant, 229 and 172 for his career. Catfish, 224 and 166.
Yeah.
So we talk about counting stats. That's the same right there. Innings pitched, a few more to Louis, and a few more games started. In fact, 8 more games started for Luis Tiant. So a similar style career. Louis had more saves, 15 saves. The WAR, I know we didn't have it back then, but Catfish, his WAR is 41 for his career. Luis Tiant is 66, 25 wins better above replacement than Catfish Hunter. His ERA plus is 10 points higher. Again, another stat you didn't have back then. 400 more strikeouts, better strikeout percentage. Catfish had a better walk percentage. But then you look at that awards and honors part of it. Hall of Fame, Catfish, check. Championships, 5. All-Star, 8. Cy Young, 1. ERA title, 1. Luis Tiant, 3 All-Star teams. Looking back at the numbers, it probably should have been a little bit more. And 2 ERA titles. No championships, no Cy Young. It feels like, obviously, we know a big part of the Hall of Fame is a popularity contest when it comes down to it. And the other thing I think is fascinating is when we're going to be looking at, we think Luis Tiant should be in the Hall of Fame now. Again, not a runaway, but I think he should be in the Hall of Fame now. When we look back at this 15, 20 years from now, the way we're going to have to look at pitchers for their Hall of Fame cases, people are going to be saying, my God, how did this guy not get in? Because when we're looking at counting stats, we're taking away 300 wins. We're taking away 3,000 strikeouts. Guys aren't going to be hitting those numbers anymore. So do you think to that end, in 15, 20 years, there is going to be more momentum, or maybe not momentum, but more people looking at Luis Tiant's stats and saying, how did this guy not get in?
Yeah, I think there'll be more of that because you're right, with 5-man rotations and pitch counts and all, we're not going to see guys like Louis pitching 270, 300 innings the way they were. Mm-hmm. But so I think the numbers, the expectation of numbers will be lowered for the Hall of Fame. By the same token, the argument's going to be that Louis competed in that era where everybody did throw 300. The best ones did throw 300 innings a year. So where are the victories? I think that's going to. I think you hit on the big thing. The number of championships, the number of times that he was on national TV in October. And this gets to, who's a better all-time kicker, Vinatieri or the Ravens guy, Tucker? Yep. Tucker. Who's a better kicker? Tucker's probably a better kicker, but Vinatieri had so many clutch kicks when everybody was watching because it was the only game on TV. It was the playoffs, and both those guys, incidentally, are Hall of Famers. But I mean, just that idea that you're seeing guys winning championships, that's so important when it gets down to subjective voting for a Hall of Fame.
All right, let's talk El Tiante then. By the way, I mean, his numbers are fairly similar to John Lester's, by the way, for Red Sox fans out there. And Lester is someone I think we can all agree on, pretty damn good career, not a Hall of Famer. I was trying to see if he was closer to Lester or Greinke, and he's a little bit closer to Lester. Anyway, let's talk about Luis Tiant, the guy, because we talked last about Pete Rose, and there's a lot that comes with Pete Rose. Not the nicest guy in the world. And Luis Tiant has the Hall of Fame case without the Hall of Fame campaign, without the betting on baseball, without the statutory rape charges. None of that package comes with Luis Tiant. And we've met him. I think met him a couple of times. because he would sit outside Fenway, outside the Tiante grill or whatever it was, and sign pictures and take pictures and tell stories. What were your interactions? I think you went up and asked him about that game where he threw whatever, like 180 pitches.
Yeah, it was funny. You and I went to that game, and yeah, he would always sit outside his El Tiante Cuban sandwich shack
Good.
there.
Yeah.
And yeah, very great interacting with the fans. So I remember the time you and I went up, it was, I think, 1974. Red Sox had a very good team that year. And he lost the game. I think he lost the game 3-2. He pitched into the 16th inning. It was a complete game, like 15 and a third, 15 and 2/3
Oh
innings,
my God.
and he loses the game. And I mentioned it to him, and I'm giving him the details that I remember. And apparently it made an impression on Louis too, because he corrected me on a couple of things. It was like, say, 15 and 2/3 versus 15 and a third, or something
Yeah,
like
40
that.
years
But
later. Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, when Luis Tiant pitched, number one, there was an atmosphere around Fenway, and you went to, I think, one Pedro game.
Mm-hmm.
Pedro started, and you saw
First
all
game.
the Dominican flags and the Dominicans outside the ballpark, inside the ballpark. There was just the place was electric. It was the same thing with Louis, and the difference was with Pedro, it's just because he had outstanding stuff. He was a great pitcher with outstanding stuff. Louis, it was because he was a great pitcher during that era with stuff that he created on his own out of nowhere because he didn't have the arm. But
Mm-hmm.
he also, like Pedro, just had that engaging personality.
It was a show. It was a show.
Unlike a Pete Rose,
Mm-hmm.
Louis was just, he put on a show on the mound. He was accommodating to the press. He was accommodating to the fans. He was just an incredibly likable guy. That's what you loved about him. It's not just that he was an underdog because he'd shredded his arm and he could never throw 90 miles an hour after his first injury, long before he came to the Red Sox. It's just this everyman who made something out of nothing and was just glad to be out there, glad to be living every day.
Yeah.
That was just his persona, and fans just loved him. And you saw some of that even well into his retirement, that when he would come back to Fenway, when he would be the featured alum at the game, and Fred Lynn did that about 79 games a year, but the other two, it was Fisk or Louis. And they would pan on Louis in about the fourth inning, the camera, and people just give him a standing ovation. They just remember how great he was on some really great Red Sox teams.
And there was always a line at El Tiante, by the way. Always a line around his stool.
There was. I mean, I couldn't care less about Cuban sandwiches, but
right.
I wanted to talk to Louis, and I kind of felt obligated to have a Cuban sandwich afterwards.
Yeah. And speaking of all that, you said he made something out of nothing, and he really did that twice. I mean, he grew up in early Castro, Cuba. In fact, he would have been there when it became Castro's Cuba. And so he has to then abandon his life to come play baseball and then make something out of nothing again with the arm injury. And last time we had you on, we talked 75 World Series, probably the peak of Louis' career in terms of the moment. Yep. And that game at Fenway where his dad was there. You talked a little bit about it. Tell me what that game was like when, they keep flashing to his dad, who's a thumbs up as he's striking out some of the best hitters of the generation. It must have been like a really big time memorable day.
Yeah, it was emotional. It's not like today where, God, every time, this guy's making his major league debut, and every time he throws a strike, they're panning to his parents. Yeah. Who cares? That's nice story. But with Louis, I mean, he had left his parents, I don't know, 15 years before in Cuba. His dad had been a great baseball player in Cuba. Louis followed. One of those stories like Orlando Cepeda being the great son of a Puerto Rican player. So he had that legacy, and then he has to leave suddenly. His parents can't get out. A lot of diplomatic efforts before the 75 World Series to try to get his...
And by the way, that makes a big deal that the parents can't get out, because then they're still living in Cuba. and everyone knows their son is defected. That's also not an easy part of this. But yeah, they efforted it before the World Series.
And then the parents come, and it's just, I mean, it brought people to tears. It was a really great human interest story that these parents, for the first time, get to see their son, the all-star, the major leaguer, the World Series player, playing on the biggest stage. It was emotional for everybody.
And I do think it's kind of a crime to his career too, with how much we value postseason stats for a pitcher. You mentioned Curt Schilling, and he should be getting in almost off that alone. And those 70s Red Sox specifically would have done, I think, really well to have the expanded playoffs that you see today, to have a division series. 72, they make the championship series, if I'm not mistaken. And then 74, they kind of fall out of it the last month. 75, they go to the World Series. 78, they obviously blow it big time. But each of those would have been playoff teams. And then we get 8 more Luis Tiant playoff starts. Do you think that would have helped them?
Oh, absolutely. I got to correct you on one thing. 72, they lost by half a game.
Half a game.
They lost to the Tigers. That was the strike shortened season, and one of the teams played one fewer game than the other. So they missed out. They were in Detroit for the last 3 games of the season. Whoever won 2 would win, and the Tigers won the first 2. But yeah, so the expanded playoffs, I mean, those 70s Red Sox teams would have been in 72, 74, 75, 77, 78. Louis would have seen a lot of postseason action, and things would have been very different. Suddenly you would have seen 15, 18 starts versus the one he had in the playoffs in 75, because they swept Oakland in then 3 games in the best of 5, and then the 7-game World Series. So 3 total starts didn't do him justice. He did great in all 3 of them, but if he'd had another dozen of those, people might have been thinking very differently about Louis when he came up for the Hall of Fame originally.
Yeah, and I don't know if this needs to be part of his Hall of Fame case. I don't want to make him out to be Jackie Robinson or anything, but there weren't a lot of Cubans in the league at that time. We were still barely letting the Puerto Ricans come and play baseball. Ask Roberto Clemente how tough it was. You know what I mean? And so now, what is obviously one of the richest baseball nations in the world, Luis Tiant is kind of a trailblazer there in a lot of ways. It doesn't get remembered.
We are Rogue Media Sports.